we'll just run through it. It's apparently when I go to full screen, it kicks me out. So we'll just run through it in the window. Not that big a deal. Quick and dirty. We'll talk a little bit about, well, actually, let's start with the first one. I'm not a lawyer. This isn't legal advice, strictly speaking. This is how I've done things and it's worked for me. Yeah, you all are going to have to find your way. If you get into it and you find something that isn't working for you, come back and report it to us. We're all about sharing information. So this isn't the right way to do it. This is my way to do it, and it's worked for me. If you've gotten into it and you find something easier, please let us know, because we're all trying to find the best way through. I shoot primarily stills, and pretty much all of my work ends up being published in one way or another. And so that's going to be important later on down the road, because they do ask us to make sure, or they do ask us to differentiate between published and unpublished works. And then the other thing to understand is that publishing is a much wider range than what we might think about. It doesn't just have to be printed. It doesn't have to be, posted on somebody else's website. Putting it on your Instagram is publishing it. Putting it in your email newsletter or sharing it with your group of friends, that's considered publishing. So, majority of work that I produce is published. There are ways you can set it up where you can register work that hasn't yet been published, but I usually don't go through with that, because again, everything I'm shooting is going to get published. Done. It makes it so much easier. It's one registration to deal with. And then finally, like I said, we all like to complain about government websites, but copyright.gov is actually really well done. There's a lot of information there. They've anticipated a lot of the questions that most of us will have. So if you are unsure about how to do something, most of the time that question has already been answered. And there goes my dog, because the mail's here. But sorry about that, y'all. All right, let's go with that. So what is a copyright? Strictly speaking, a copyright is your legal right to benefit from the creative works that you've made. It is part of the Constitution. It was put in there by the founders because they knew that a vibrant economy and a vibrant art scene were going to be one of the keys to a continuing and a strong nation, right? We needed to be able to innovate, and the best way to get people to innovate is to allow them to profit from it. Basically, if you've made a piece of art, something new, a photograph, an illustration, a drawing, it will be copyrighted the moment that you've created it. In order to be copyrightable, a work needs two things. It needs to be original and it needs to be fixed. Fixed from our perspective, physically clicking the shutter fixes the image. It saves it on on your piece of film. It saves it on your memory card. Now it is fixed. It can be reproduced. And then originality, we can get into all kinds of craziness in terms of whether it's original or not. But basically, if it hasn't been done before exactly like the way that you've done it, it's original. Who owns the copyright? Well, if you took the picture, chances are you own the copyright. The old saying is, whoever created it owns it. As soon as you take the picture, as soon as you press record, you've created a new work because it's original and it's been fixed, and you're the one that created it, so you're the owner of that copyright. Two situations that come up pretty often where this isn't automatically the case. The first one is an employment situation. So if I'm working for a corporation as their staff photographer, and I'm taking photos in the course of my job, then strictly, or under the law, I am not the copyright owner of those photos. The corporation is, because they're my employer and I'm working as their employee. And then the other situation that comes up a lot for us, especially as freelancers, are the lovely work for hire agreements that we will see come across our email and our desk from time to time. Work for hire basically says that the client is the copyright holder, not the artist. We can all go back and forth a million times as to whether or not we think that that's a good idea or not. Everybody's, your mileage may vary. Everybody's in a different situation. But generally speaking, whoever shot the photo, whoever created the piece of work is the owner of the work, unless you're an employee or unless it's a work for hire agreement. Do you actually have to register the work? strictly speaking, no. Right? As soon as the work is created, it is protected. You've basically gone through and you've created the work. That's all you had to do to receive your rights. From a practical perspective, though, all of the other stuff that we do alongside of it, things like putting the copyright notice on our website and on our mailers and in places that it goes out, putting it into the metadata, monitoring the world out there to make sure that our work is not being used without authorization, and then going after people that use it illegally or unauthorized use. All of these things are good business practices. And of course, registering your copyright, we'll talk about that in depth here in a minute, are all going to help us in the event that someone is using an image or using our work unauthorized. Without going through these steps, yes, strictly speaking, you're protected, but it makes it just a whole lot harder to collect on those unauthorized uses if you haven't gone through the necessary steps to make it really just locked down and tight. Actually, let me go back just to talking about registration, because Mike and I were talking about this real quick in the opening. I've never had to go to court to protect my copyright, but I have definitely sent a fair number of demand or takedown letters over the course of my career. And one thing I've found that is, you can send a letter to somebody saying, hey, that's mine, you shouldn't use it, and they might just ignore you. But if you send them a letter and it's you're quoting the codes of part of the US code, USC 17, and you're putting the fact that the work has been registered with the Copyright Office, and you include the registration number in there, that goes a long way towards showing folks that you're serious. And I can imagine the conversations on the other side where, the client or the person who's using your work, they get that letter and they hand it to their lawyer, and their lawyer is like, yeah, no, just pay the guy. It's easier to pay them because you're not going to win. Having that registration number goes a long way towards getting you paid quickly and easily. And it's really not that hard. I have a pretty standard process I run through. I've been doing this a long time, but I still go through a checklist on almost every job that I shoot, just because I have a lot of smaller jobs in-house all at the same time, and I'll tend to forget. And one of the last items I have on my list before I archive the job is I copy the images to a separate folder from my copyright registration. It's not that hard to kind of go through things. Basically, I have a preset in Lightroom where if I export the job to deliver to the client, and the next step is I just export those same files again to a folder on my working drive. Talk about published and unpublished. We kind of covered that already. Pretty straightforward. Now the Copyright Office will allow you to register up to 750 images in a single group registration. If you have more than that, they're going to make you break it up into different registration groups. As we get into kind of the walkthrough on this, you'll find that there becomes a point at which it comes a little trickier to register them, and it's nothing we can't work around, but it's, from my mind, registering that many all at once, it takes a while. So it just kind of depends on how often you're creating work that needs to be registered. Instead of like, I do it quarterly, but you may want to go monthly or something along those lines. But you can register a large group of images at once under one registration case and under one registration number. You have 90 days from publication to register that work in order to have it considered to be protected from its publication date. So in other words, if I publish a photo on July 1st and it gets infringed on July 15th, but I don't register it until July 30th, I can still go back to that infringer saying that you've infringed upon a registered image, because since I registered within 90 days, it is considered protected from the first. So it's kind of retroactive to the date of publication. If it's outside of 90 days, then your protection starts on the date that you send the registration in. That's pretty straightforward on that side there. You're going to need to gather some information for the registration process before you get started. because there are different slots that you're going to have to fill this in a couple of different places. Obviously, you're going to need the file name of the files that you're going to be uploading to the Copyright Office. There's a really easy way to set that. I'll show you in a few minutes. You will need to know the date of the first publication. So in other words, when did it actually publish in the first time? And I have always used the delivery date to the client as the publication date, because from my perspective, it could be published at any time after that. You know, even if it's a magazine shoot that they say, well, we're not going to run this till October, they might not. But I know that I delivered it on Friday, so there's nothing that's going to stop them from running it on Saturday on their Instagram or teasing it in some way to something to their clients. So from my perspective, excuse me, from my perspective, the publication date is the delivery date to the client. Country of first publication, I'm based in the US. I'm assuming most of us here on this tonight are, because these are how we register things with the US Copyright Office. And finally, the other piece of information you need is any other claimant. A claimant is basically the person who owns the copyright, as opposed to you who is doing the registration. I do all of my own registration, so I am the person who's filling out the form, and I also am the person who's the claimant. If you were doing this on someone else's behalf, you would need their information as well. All right, jump down to the next one. Okay. My specific registration process, I break down into 3 subgroups. One, you have to collect your images that you're going to end up registering. And as I said, I do this once a quarter. So basically on my working drive, I have a folder, you know, I've got one going right now. It's, you know, Q3 2024. I have a Lightroom export that I use. So as soon as I deliver the job, I send that off to the client. I then export those images again to that copyright folder, and I just let it build up over time. The export is set to scale the images relatively small. They're only about 1,000 pixels wide. It's JPEG compression down to level 50, so they're really small files, heavily compressed. I don't need these to be perfect for reproduction. I just need people to be able to see what's what. Excuse me. But yeah, I go through, put all of the images in the folder, have it ready to go, and then at the end of the quarter, I can start the registration process. I'm going to stop sharing my slide deck here and jump over to every photographer's favorite program, Microsoft Excel. So pause this for just a second. And let's see if we can get Excel going here. The Copyright Office has there we go. The Copyright Office has a form that is available on their website, and we'll have links at the end. But when you go to copyright.gov and get started in the process, it'll tell you 3 different times to download this form and keep it. I just keep a copy of it on my hard drive at all times because I know I'm going to need it. But this is actually a fairly well done form. It'll tell you if you haven't filled anything in. It'll tell you if you need to get more information or something along those lines. But we had said earlier that we needed to know the file name of the photo, which is across here. And the easiest thing to do is you've got your folder of your folder of images. You just go in there, you select all the files, you hit copy, you hit paste, and it'll drop all of those file names right in here. I do have to say, however, it only works in Excel. If you try that copy and paste method in like Apple Pages or Google Docs, it doesn't work as well. And then you have to physically go in one by one and type those file names. And if you've got 500 of them or so, that could take a while. Whereas Excel, you can literally just copy and paste from the Finder over into here. The title of your photograph, if you have a separate title other than the file name, you would put that here. I don't do that. I just keep the file name and the title the same. And it just makes it easier from my perspective for 2 reasons. One, if I have to come back later and look up an image that has been infringed, I'm able to track it down by its original file name. And I have this document here that tells me, oh, wait, this is picture 307, and it was registered in July 2024. So I know the registration number it's got. keeping the file name and the title together it makes things a little bit easier. When was it first published? We talked about that. You don't need the actual day, you just need the month. So you could just say July 2024 and just paste that all the way down on this list. Once you do that, this will automatically generate a list of titles, and it'll autofill everything in here for you. Makes it so much easier. You don't have to worry about this. This will autofill as you go across. And then finally, you're missing information. If there's anything in here you haven't filled in, it'll shine bright red and tell you, hey, you got to put this document or put this information in here. And then the other thing that we need to look at is your case number. When you first go on to the website, you're going to tell it you're going to create a new grip registration. It's going to assign you a case number at that point, and it's not going to be on the top of everything that you see. You'll just copy and paste that into here. And actually, when I end up saving this document, I'll save it with that case number and my last name. So that way it's just easier to track everything down. I hate Excel, but this is not that hard. So what I'll do is I'll populate this document, I'll save it to my hard drive, but then I'll keep it open because I'm going to have to refer back to it in just a second. Which brings me to part 3. We got to go into, where is it? No, bear with me just a second. I got to pull up my my web browser because we're going to go on to, there it is.
Cameron.
Okay. Welcome to the beautiful website of the Copyright Claims Board and copyright.gov. It's actually not that hard to manage, but as I said, there's a lot of information in here as you can go through and you can learn about different types of work. So if you're working in motion or audio, there's a slightly different registration process for that, but it's not too terribly different. They do have a really robust section into how to register your work. Again, it's very helpful. They've anticipated a lot of the questions that we've had. So if something I'm doing doesn't necessarily directly apply to what you're doing, the answers are probably already on here. But the first step is you got to log on to the ECO because, of course, we do. And yes, your typical warning about we're working on a government process. And yes, they want us to use Mozilla because why wouldn't they? Okay. You have multiple options. If you look over on the left here, you have multiple options on how to register your work. For the types of stuff that I do, I'm registering a group of photographs. There are other kinds of things you can register. If you're registering an entire magazine, that would be under groups of published works. If you've got unpublished, a number of different options. But I'm registering a group of photographs. All right, they can be published or unpublished, but you're going to have to tell them. You're going to have to basically fill out the form, pay the fee, which as of now is $55, and then you upload all your stuff. It's pretty straightforward. First step. What kind? We are published. Yes, I have read all of this. Again, if you don't like the way I'm explaining it, you can watch their video that kind of goes through the whole thing, or you can read their text. Pardon me, there it is. So we talked about earlier that case number. That's it right there. So this will be your case number, and eventually this will actually be your registration number for when you, if you have to put the certificate of the registration number in a demand letter. This is actually that file number that's going to be in there. But this is what you'll put into that Excel spreadsheet later. Let's see. Let's get this going. Here we go. New file. We'll call it the APA test. Say there's 150 photos in this group. 24, earliest date, call it July 1, latest date today, July 16th. And nation of first publication, USA, easy. And then basically you just kind of go down the list here. Here's the trick. We talked about the image, the titles, I'm sorry, not the image, but the image titles that were going to be generated automatically in that Excel doc. What you'll do is you will cut and paste those titles into this window here. The challenge is it has a 1995 character limit. So if you've got 700 files and each file name is, 10 to 15 characters long, you're going to run over that really quickly. So what you have to do, and this is where it's a stupid pain in the butt, is you have to go through and you have to break it up group by group. Typically what I do is I just go month by month. So like if I'm doing a Q3 registration, I'll do all of the images that I delivered in July would be one set of titles. And again, you just tell it the month that it was published. And I would paste them in there and I would save it. But it'll allow you to get out of there. Come on. It'll allow you to create as many of these title lists as you need. So I have had registrations where I've had to create 4 different title lists, and you just go through and you say, okay, well, this is the first 60 images and here's the titles. And then here are the titles for images 61 to 105. And you just go down until you fill them all out. I'm sure there's a reason why their character count is limited to 1995. I don't know what it is. But once you get through that, then it's just, who are you? As you create your account on the ECO and the Electronic Copyright Office, it'll ask for your name and your address and all that other stuff. And it remembers you. So you can literally just hit the Add Me button and it puts me in here. I'm a US citizen. I don't need to worry about my domicile. I can put my date of birth at, I can put all of this extra information in if I want, but I'm not going to. We talk a little bit about work for hire. I can't imagine why I would try to register a work that I had done for someone else's work made for hire, but maybe if someone else was working for me in a work for hire situation, this is how I would register that work. But again, that's not the type of work that I do. I shoot all my own stuff. Come on, there you go. All right, claimants. Again, I'm the only claimant, so I can just hit that. Continue. Rights and permission. If somebody, one of the options that the Copyright Office allows is for people to search for copyright. So if they see something and they want to know if it's copyrighted, strictly speaking, they could search for it and it might pull up my information. So this is, if they find an image of mine and they need to reach out, how do they do that? There's all my contact info. Same thing, if the Copyright Office has to ask me any questions, who do they reach out to? That's me. Where do they mail the certificate when it's done? Yeah, that's me. Special handling. If I'm working just in routine, if I'm doing this every quarter, there is no special handling. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not worried about how long it's going to take because it'll take weeks or months for me to get the certificate back. I don't have to worry about that unless I've got something coming up like pending or prospective litigation, things along these lines here. There's a surcharge. It's pretty pricey depending on how quickly you need it. But if you need it, it's not a problem. But I don't typically have any special handling, so I can skip that. And then I have to actually certify that, yeah, I created all this stuff. This is me. And again, we had said earlier where we put when we save that Excel spreadsheet, it's asking me for what the file name is going to be. So as I said, I will typically put the the case number in. It would be what, XLS X, I think, is the extension. I don't use an internal tracking number. Go for it if you want to. And then finally, I review everything, add it to the cart, and then I get to pay. Oh yeah, see, I started a test one earlier just to make sure I was doing it right. But each group registration is $55. I do the registration once a quarter. You can do it as often as you like. I know some photographers and some artists do it for every major project that they've completed. So if they've just shot a cookbook, they'll do all of the photos from that cookbook in one group. We're all going to find our way that works best for us. But I found that quarterly works for me because I deliver a fair number of images, but nothing crazy. And then you go through and you give them your credit card number and you pay, and then you submit your work. And that is, I'm not going to actually pay because I didn't actually do it. So it's not going to take me forward to the upload document or upload page, but it's an upload page. You've seen it all before. You'll run your case. Typically, they're running 3 to 6 months from the time you submit to the time you get your certificate back in the mail. When my certificate comes in, I scan it. I put a copy of the certificate in with the folder of images that got sent out, and I put it in my archive. And I know that if I've got an infringement, I've got a pretty good memory for the images that I've shot. I'm going to know where did that image come from. I'll be able to go look when I shot it, go to the corresponding quarterly filing and double check and make sure that, yeah, if this was Q2, 2024, I've got the number right there because the document is right there in that folder. It's all good to go. As I said, I've never had to actually go to court when I can send them a copy of that document, or I can send them a copy of the registration number. Everything I need is right there. I do it once a quarter. Doesn't take long. I can do it on a Saturday afternoon in probably about an hour. So that's the long and short of it. I went really quick now that I'm looking at the time. Sorry about that. I did to talk fast. I drink a lot of coffee. We'll open it up for questions. If you've got anything you want to add, I'd love to hear it because I'm always looking for ways to make this a little bit easier. Please.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, we did have a few questions in the chat. I did want to add, I know you went over at the very beginning a little bit about whether or not you automatically have the copyright or not, and whether you should bother to register. I did want to add that if you register your copyright after infringement, then it limits your case. Should it go to court, it limits it to actual damages,
right.
Versus statutory damages. So that's
Well,
one very good reason.
Yes, if you registered after an infringement, that is outside of that 90 days. If you're within that 90-day window, you're protected. But yeah, you're right. It's always a good idea to register it before the infringement because that's a big help, and it's a big stick the infringer gets hit with on their end.
Okay, and then so we'll start with some of the questions here from the beginning. So Aaron asked, what if you're making work for yourself, like fine art, not for a client? Are they supposed to remember the date that they put it on their personal website? And then as an aside, why does the Copyright Office make it harder for us to actually own the work we make than not?
Well, as far as the work that you're creating for yourself, the Copyright Office doesn't make a distinction between work that you were paid for and work and personal work. The only distinction they make is work that has been published or unpublished. And if you've put it on your website, then it's published. If you don't remember exactly when it was published, I don't see that as being a big headache, as long as you can get pretty close to it. So if you think, oh, I shot this in the summer of 2020, then you can reasonably say, June or July 2020 is when you published it. And as far as the Copyright Office making it harder, the Copyright Office is literally a building full of 1,000 attorneys. That's kind of how they roll. And I don't know if there's any attorneys out here. I'm sorry, but that's you can't get 5 attorneys to agree on anything, much less 1,000 of them. So yeah, it's remember, you are protected by copyright regardless of whether or not you've registered your image. But not registering your image limits the amount that you'll be able to collect in the event of an infringement.
Okay, and then Let's see. Susan asked if you could restate the dimensions that you create for your photos, for your
Yeah,
submissions.
for the submission photos, mine are all 1,000 pixels on their long dimension. So that's, I work in Lightroom. And so Lightroom allows you to basically save output settings that you use regularly. And that's one that I've just saved. I know Capture One will allow you to do the same. And I have that in my preset to go. And it's just, they're saved as a JPEG. They're saved at level 50 compression. So it's a pretty high level of compression. It makes the files, that much smaller. I live out in the middle of nowhere. I live out on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I don't have the greatest internet service. It's not bad, but it ain't great. And I can usually upload my quarterly registration. By the time I hit send, it's 5 or 6 minutes worth of uploading. It's really not that bad. It's typically 20 or 30 megabytes worth of data by the time it goes from there.
Okay. And then Vanessa's asking, do you have to cite every individual photo in a book to copyright? So if she says, if I'm paraphrasing an author's work, would I have to get permission from the author to copyright, or can I proceed with copyright registration and give them credit for some of the content in a created book? And then she adds as a note, the setup template of the book has been created by the author and just paraphrased another author's work to support their book.
I think that's going to go outside of my area of expertise. It sounds like, so my registration process is just for published photographs. They have a registration process for other types of published works, including periodicals and including books. And that runs through an entirely different process than well, not entirely, but a slightly different process than the registration one for photographs. If you were paraphrasing an author's work, see, that's where they talk about originality can come in. Honestly, I don't feel qualified to answer that kind of question because I'm not an IP attorney. But do you have to cite every individual photo in a book to copyright? Yes. If I were registering a group of photos that were published in a book, I would register every single photo that I sent to that client, even if they decided not to use that particular one. I did a cookbook. It's been years, but we sent 300 photos over total for that book, and they ran 60 of them. But I copyrighted all 300 of those photos, and I consider them all published because I don't know if she's going to use it. Maybe she didn't put them in the book, but she might use some of the outtakes to promote that book on Instagram or social or other stuff outside. So the possibility that she might use it is good enough for me to say it's published because I got it off my hard drive. I showed it to somebody else. That's it. That's the public. It's out there. It's now considered published.
Yeah, I think once it's left your hands, whether or not the person uses it, you have to assume that they have the option of using it, and it might get out of their hands. All right. And then Susan had a question here. If I submit 5 works for a competition and only 3 are accepted, i.e. published, this is very related to what we were just discussing, what date would you use? The date of submission of the 5 or the date of the email that the 3 are accepted? And then she had a follow-up to that. If I've already submitted an image previously, then I assume I will not resubmit that image in the group being submitted as part of the most recent copyright submission.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, everybody is going to find their own way on this. I consider the date of delivery to the client to be the date of publication because I have absolutely had clients turn around and I have sent them the file saying, hey, here's the link to the pictures. I'll run you up an invoice and get that out to you in a minute here. And before I finish the invoice, they've already put the stuff on Instagram. So, I mean, as soon as it's delivered, it's published. So in my mind, publication means showing it to a member of the public. If I call my son over and say, hey, dude, come look at this, that's not being published. If I email it to Mike and say, hey, take a look at this, I would consider that being published.
Right. And then let's see, then Aaron has another question here. It's very interesting. if work is printed and hung in a gallery, are those physical prints considered published by the Copyright Office?
Since I don't work for the Copyright Office, I can't say what they would consider it, but I would consider it published. Again, it's put out into the public for their viewing and their consumption. It's that simple.
Right. I don't know that the medium that it's created on necessarily matters.
Right.
If it's a print, versus a digital file, it's still an image, and it's left your hands at that point and gone into someone else's hands. It would be published.
Yeah. And then there's a follow-up here. She says, even if it's not digital, because I just saw that pop up as well. I would say, we're registering digital works, but the digital has nothing to do with the publication or the creation method. It's just the registration method. You could use this method to register works of, copy shots you did of watercolor art that you've created, or oil paintings that you've created. The electronic or the digital registration is just the delivery method to the Copyright Office. It has nothing to do with the creation or the consumption method of the actual art.
That's right. And then, all right, Ian had a question. Well, he asked if you could go over filling out the spreadsheet again. I'm wondering if maybe you want to do that again at the end for anybody who wants to kind of see that portion again. Would that be
Sure.
all right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And yes, if you can stick around for that, Ian, we can go through that one more time. Vanessa had a couple of questions here. Well, it's one that I think we already kind of discussed. Do you have to cite every individual photo in a book to copyright? Oh no, okay. I think we already covered that. I'm sorry. So Bill asked, in the event of an infringement, how do you determine how much you can receive in damages?
I think that's an entire other Zoom call, but in my mind, I try to honestly go out and say, okay, if the client had come to me and asked to license these images, what would I have charged them? And then I double it. And that's what I ask for. That's how I do things. I've heard people say, "Oh no, it's always triple because you've cheated. It's triple." I've heard people say, "No, it's 10 times." I'm of the mind that if I hit them with a $50,000 bill and they're a small mom and pop restaurant, they're never going to pay it. They don't have the money. And I would have never charged them that amount of money to license this in the beginning. But if it was a $500 licensing fee, probably, yeah, I'll ask for $1,000. I don't have a problem with that. It really is just based on, it still has to be based on the original value of what it would have been had they come to you and done it the right way. Others may disagree. That's just that's how I think about it. I think there is a fair number of people that don't understand this and don't understand how all this works. But I also think there are a fair number of people who know exactly how this works, and they're just trying to see what they can get away with.
For sure. I mean, I think if you are in a situation where you're in court and you're suing for actual damages, at that point, I mean, the lawyer would help you determine that number, and I think there is a limitation. I think it's $150,000 per image, but again, yeah, a lawyer would be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
For
Well,
sure.
and an attorney's going to take a big cut of whatever you claim. So let them let them sing for their supper for sure. But yeah, you're right. That's if it goes to court, I'm gonna say, here's what I think, and then I'm gonna hand it to the lawyer and walk away because they know what they're doing.
All right, and then we've got an interesting question from Carlton. If I collaborate with other photographers on a session, who has the rights?
So there is a procedure for registering joint works. So if, let's say, Mike and I were to collaborate on a piece of music that we were to register, we could both be joint owners. And what that would mean is we would both have an equal share and have an equal ability to protect our copyright within that. That's a different registration process than the one that I just showed you. Again, just like the question to the book, there is a method for registering a periodical or a printed book as one single piece, as opposed to registering the photos that are contained within that book. And it's also the same thing if you're registering a joint work, it's a slightly different process to register that. But generally speaking, if you're collaborating with a second artist, you can both register the piece and you both have full rights that you're able to protect. What you don't have is you don't have any ability to cut that collaborator out. So again, if Mike and I create a beautiful piece of music and then 5 years, and then we copyright it, and then 5 years later, Mike and I have a falling out, I can't cut him out of the rights to that music, and he can't cut me out of the rights to that music either. Well, I shouldn't say can't, not without really going to court and spending a lot of money.
That's right. Okay, Susan's got another question here. She says, in terms of creating an archive that I'm doing, all 50 years of it, I have a specific process for the naming of images. She asks, can I use, quote, my naming for the registration?
I believe you can. I always use my own naming convention, and I've never had it be thrown back to me. I believe, my whole idea behind the naming convention is being able to easily find that image again later down the road if I need it. So if I see an image out there, and I'm able to roughly get an idea as to when I shot it, because again, I have a pretty good idea of when I shot most stuff. That'll enable me to track it down. So yeah, I think you're allowed to use your own naming without issue.
Okay, and then well, we had a question, and it was asked to me directly, so I'm not sure if it was intended for everybody, so I won't tell who asked it, but it says regarding published versus non-published, so they heard that within the last few years, a case has provided precedent, which makes it not a fatal error as to whether we made a mistake in delineating correctly published versus non-published. Do you have any info you can share on that?
I don't. I think that sounds like a reasonable precedent to me, though. I think that, when we register a piece of work, because, we've got a room of 40 professional image makers here, or however many of us are on there. We've got a lot of professional image makers in here, and we're still going round and round as to what constitutes publishing. And we're the ones that probably know better than most people out there in the general populace. So if it's still a little squishy with people like us, and we're really good at this, you can imagine how hard it is out there in the general public. So yeah, I think that I'm not familiar with that particular precedent, but that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, that question was from Amy. So, but I do recall that as well, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer to it, but I do remember some discussion of that. So, that's something we should look into after this. And Cameron added in the chat that his attorney usually goes for 5 times, what he would typically license for. So, yeah, very good. Okay, and then you can also look at ASMP's legal representative Tom Madry has info on it, so we can also point you there as well. Okay, I don't know if do we have any other questions, or before Steve goes back to putting together or kind of going over his spreadsheet. Okay. Right, yeah, Steve, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Oh, there's one more question here. Let's see. Oh, interesting. Okay. Susan says, when I worked as an editorial photojournalist, spending a decade outside the US, and would ship or pigeon undeveloped canisters of film, my agency would stamp the copyright symbol with my name with the caption. Do I include those as the date on the slide?
That's yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the best indicator you have as to when it would have been first made available for publication. without any further information about when it went, if that's your best guess, I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to go. You know, I think I think we all are so concerned about getting every individual slot on these forms perfectly correct, and obviously we want to do the best that we can. But if I say something was published on July 13th and it turned out that it didn't actually finish uploading till 12:15 that night, so technically the publication date was the next day, I don't know that that's going to come back and bite me in a negotiation. It might. As I said, I've never actually had to go to court. I've never had it to get, it's never gotten that far because I'm able to, basically we're able to scare them into submission by having these registrations.
All right, and then just a couple more follow-up questions here. Melissa was asking, is there an easy way to see if someone is using your images without your consent?
Yeah, and then the second comment was there's a group called Pixie Set, which I've heard of. There's also a group. There are a couple of reverse search engines out there where you can basically upload your archive and it will scour the web. And if they see a use of your images, it gives you an opportunity to review it and say, no, that's not my image, or yes, that's my image, but it's okay. This is the client I've licensed it to, and so on. There are a number of those groups out there. Copy Track is another one. They all charge a fee. And if they have and if they find an infringement, they will basically do all the legwork for you. They'll send a takedown notice, they'll send a demand letter, they'll send an invoice, and they'll collect a certain portion of whatever they'll keep a portion of whatever they collect. But yeah, I know Pixie Set is one, I know Copy Track is another, and then there's a couple.
And I don't know, I'll call out Cameron Davidson on here. I know you have some really great resources for that. If you wanted to share them in the chat for folks, that'd be great. And then last question here we'll take from Amy. Do you ever let your clients know that you're registering? Is your copyright registration fee part of your invoicing?
I don't invoice for that specifically. I have had very upfront conversations with all of my clients as to who owns the copyright and how all of this works. I don't do a lot of agency work. Most of the work I do is direct to client. And for the most part, they're grateful to have the work that I'm creating for them to know that it's being protected. Because again, if I shoot a lot of food. So if I'm working for a restaurant group, they don't want one of their competitors picking up their images and using them as their own. And I've told clients repeatedly, I have no problem going after your competitor for copyright infringement. I'm going to hit them hard. And I do the same thing with I shoot a lot of architecture, same thing with architects and designers and furniture makers and things like that. I'm very upfront. Yeah, I register all my work and I got no problem going after somebody that uses work without authorization.
Okay, great. All right. And then yeah, Steve, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and going over your spreadsheet one more time, just briefly.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Wrong screen, sorry. Try that again. All right, there we go. So you should all be seeing the Excel spreadsheet. And before that gets too far, let me see if let me pull up. I'm going to do this off camera here, but I'll be right back. I'm just going to pull up a list of files. Here we go. Okay. So off camera, what I had done is I went into my Finder. I copied a list of files that I have in my Q3 registration folder. I'm going to go to the title list here and just paste it in. And this is all of the files that I have in that folder. So currently there are 57 of them. All right. That is, as I said earlier, the file name for the photo and the title of the photo in my case is always the same. So I can just paste all of that same work right here. you can see here, it's still telling me I have to enter the year and the month and the year of the publication. All of these were published in July 2024. And okay, any of you Excel wizards out there know if there's an easy way for me to just dump this into each one of these cells, or do I have to go in and just copy and paste all the way down? Because that's really annoying. But as you can see, as I paste the date in, first off, it goes over to the far right pane and tells me I don't have any missing information, and that it has created this list of group titles here, and it's put a comma at the end of each one of them. And actually, I don't know how well any of you can see on your tiny little screen share, but one thing to notice is in my file names, when I export them out of Lightroom, I use the original file name that it was when it was delivered to the client. And again, it just helps me keep track of things and find it down the road. But then I also append it with the date as well. So, you know, Cane and Glass #1 was delivered on 7/11/24. So on Slurpee Day last week, I delivered a bunch of these images to the client. And so that tells me I don't have to go back and look at the date. I can just look at the file name that I created to know that these were all generated in July, you know. And obviously it's July, it's the first month of the third quarter. It's no big deal for me to remember this now, but in, you know, September, when I'm, you know, running around like crazy because that's my busy month, it's easy for me to have everything right there in front of me. And then this is the part when I said, you know, you only have 1,995 characters to work with per entry on the website. This is what it is. You'll basically go in and copy all of these group titles as it works down, and you'll end up pasting that into that dialog box on the ECO website. And if you go over, if it gets more than, you know, if it gets in 1,996 characters, you'll get a pop-up. It'll tell you, and you basically just have to go through and say, okay, well, this, you know, 1 through 20 is my first page, and then you have to create a second page of, you know, documents 20 through 47 or whatever it ends up being for your next 1,995. So let me get out of this. Any further questions on that? Did that help? If you select the entire column, you can paste it at once. Okay, I will give that a try next time.
I believe that is true. And then
I will give that a try, because that's like my biggest pain. It's just, you know, like I said, I hate Excel. So
well, I know Cameron brought up Libre is an alternative to Microsoft Office Suite. It's like an open source program. Since we're all getting hit with lots of subscription fees, you know, that is something you can try out. And it's, you know, it's more than just Excel. I believe they offer like the entire suite of Microsoft Office products, so their own version of them. So did want to make a point of that. So yeah, so okay, well, Steve, thank you so very much for putting on this presentation. Truly appreciate it. And for everyone who asked, we will be posting this to our YouTube page in a few weeks. And yeah, very much appreciate everybody joining us today. And thank you all so much. And we'll hope to see you next time.
And y'all know, reach out anytime directly if you've got questions. I'm happy to help.
All right, wonderful. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.